As we move on, our next session is going to be our first panel discussion for over the next 2 days. Our panel, it's themed Building Scalable Innovation and Investors' Perspective. This is a global panel where we bring together perspectives from both within India and outside India. To moderate this session, we have Jaiveer Pal. Jai is co-founder and CFO of Harbor, a startup advisor, angel investor, and a diabetes expert. He is an experienced economist and commercial leader. Prior to Harbor, he has helped set up a primary care chain in India, acquired by HCL, co-founded a primary care product in the UK that scaled to one-fourth of NHS's GPs, and worked on M&A at KPMG in India. He started his career as an investment banker on Wall Street. Jay is also visiting lecturer at King's College London, advisor to IDF Europe and Inodia. He has a lot of European and US regulatory experience and has previously advised the European Medicines Agency. Over to you, Jay.
Thanks, Shweta. Thanks for inviting me as well. First things first, thank you to all the sponsors and the organizers really for inviting us over to have this conversation, particularly some of the people that might not be front and center. Trupti, Roshan, Saloni, Shweta, thank you all for organizing such an amazing event for us. So I wanted to take some time at the beginning of this session just to introduce and give a little bit of context, but we've got a great panel for you. All the panelists come with a lot of experience of investing across multiple markets. They've taken innovations to scale. They've taken innovations into India, out of India, and everything in between. And so I wanted to really give you a sense of kind of what we're seeing in the middle of the market from being between investors and entrepreneurs. But the change in healthcare that we've all seen in the last 18 months was something which I felt kind of as a patient long before the pandemic came along. So living with type 1 diabetes, I've seen healthcare go from very analog models of, very broad-based drugs that were given to you, that you had to wake up at a certain time, you had to eat a certain thing, you had to live your life a certain way, to things that fit in around your life. So today I'm on an AI system that manages my blood sugar, automated, that was originally patient designed and then came out of research. And so the system has shifted so much in the last in the last 15 to 20 years. We're now seeing innovators being selected by funders who have a very different profile, very different background, and have solutions that could potentially disrupt large markets. The market that I live in type 1 diabetes is dominated by some of the largest players in the world, the Medtronics, the Abbotts, the Lillys, Novo Nordisk, etc. And we're seeing people disrupt them very successfully. So what we're seeing in the market sitting between is you've got many more innovations coming to market. You've got this valley of death still at the early stage, that once someone has raised their seed funding, getting the next round is always the hardest thing to do. How do you do that if you don't know the right VCs? How do you do that if you haven't got the right connectivity, the right network? And that's a goal that we've been having at Harbor, is trying to solve that problem. And then finally, we're starting to see round sizes getting larger and larger. And those round sizes, the valuations that are coming over from Silicon Valley, are starting to hit other markets. People are starting to demand those valuations in other markets, India being one, Europe being a big one that we also see. And so for us, the market is starting to hit a really mature point when it comes to health tech investment, whether that's biotech, digital healthcare, whether it's new therapeutics, etc. We're seeing it across the board, and we're seeing the same trends happen everywhere. I think India's taken a big stride in trying to build an interface with the government system, which has historically been hard to work with, particularly in programs like the Market Access Fund, which has just been launched by people in the NHA, which we commend significantly, and Amit spoke about in his early speech. And then also in seeing the private sector starting to really double down on innovation, picking out things like Apollo moving towards drone tech, is a space that if you'd asked me when I was living in India a couple of years ago, if you'd asked me that was going to happen, I would probably have said not in your wildest dreams. I wouldn't think that would happen in your wildest dreams. So we're seeing a big shift in the innovation sector, and I think a big part of that is the the VC sector particularly becoming more mature and starting to really push on the right innovations at the right time, built for India in India, but also learning from the best abroad. So we've got speakers today that are investing abroad, investing in markets such as the US, Canada, the UK, etc., but also investing in markets like India, China, which are very different markets to the markets that historically would have driven lots of the large venture capital investing in the world. So without further ado, I'm going to give them each a chance to introduce themselves rather than me trying it and getting it wrong. So I'm going to put the first person on the spot, and I'm going to go with Alka because you're the top of my screen. So I'm going to go with you.
Oh, I thought you were starting alphabetically, but thank you. It's a really pleasure to be with everyone. I look forward to sharing my views. Just a little bit about myself. I'm the founder of Alchemy Growth Capital, which is an early stage healthcare and wellness fund. We are quite a young fund. We started about 2.5 years back, operating out of Delhi, but investing across the spectrum in healthcare and wellness. And clearly, what a time to be in healthcare. It's just amazing to see the amount of changes that are happening. Some things that were unthinkable even 5 years back is now become de facto. It's become, of course, you're going to do it this way. And I'll talk a little bit about that as the panel goes on. We've invested in a fairly diverse group of companies so far, in patient data digitization, fulfillment, distribution, OPD space, IVF, diagnostics, and women's health, hygiene. So it's been quite a broad spectrum. And just to comment on the number of companies we are seeing, is I would say at least 10 to 12 new companies every week. That's people we actually engage with. So it just talks about the amount of energy in the ecosystem, and success behooves success. People are seeing that more people want to come into startups, and that's even happening in healthcare, which was considered quite a conservative sector historically. So we are seeing that change. We're seeing a lot of people come in. The profile of the healthcare entrepreneur tends to be slightly different, and I can elaborate on that a little bit more as we go along. But very excited to be a part of this panel. Thank you.
I'm going to go next on my screen. So Lavanya, you're next on my screen.
Great. Thanks so much, Jay, and great to be here today. So yeah, my name is Lavanya. I'm an investor at InHealth Ventures. In Health Ventures, we are a London-based, healthcare-focused, early-stage transatlantic VC fund. So we're early stage, so we primarily invest at seed and Series A, typical check sizes anywhere between $300,000 up to $4 million, and we lead as well as we co-invest in rounds. We are transatlantic, so we primarily invest in Europe as well as the US, but we are always keen to explore new geographies, and India is top of our list in terms of geographies we are keen to explore. We are healthcare focused, and we are linked to the InHealth Group, which is the largest diagnostics provider in the UK. The InHealth Group sees about 2.5 million patients every year. It has 300 locations across the UK, and it primarily provides different types of tests, assessments, scans, so things like CT, PET-CT, MRI. It also runs the National Breast Cancer Screening Program in certain locations. We have a very unique relationship with the InHealth Group. So we're not a strategic VC. We don't invest off the balance sheet of the group. However, the founder is our LP. And what this really enables us to do is to help our portfolio companies access the NHS, pilot products within the larger InHealth Group whenever relevant. And a lot of our non-UK based portfolio companies look to us to help with go-to-market strategy and internationalization. So yeah, that's our link with the InHealth Group. In terms of where we invest, in the past, we've primarily invested in 3 key areas, which is diagnostics, health IT infrastructure, and SaaS for providers and payers. But last year was very exciting. We expanded scope. We made our first behavioral health investment. We made our first direct-to-consumer healthcare investment. And now I think we'd invest pretty much everywhere in healthcare other than pure biotech. So we wouldn't invest in drug candidates, but we are very open to the digital infrastructure that powers biotech. It's been a very exciting year for InHealth Ventures. We have learned so much. Our portfolio companies have learned so much, and I'm looking forward to hearing everyone else's views. And yeah, thanks so much, Jeff, for having me here today.
Thanks, Lavanya. And having been through the InHealth Ventures process a few times, I can definitely say if you're looking for funding, go their direction. It's very much it's a fun place to be. So next on my list, Ashish, you're next on my list. I'm going to go over to you.
Thank you, Jay. And hi, everyone. Pleasure to be part of the forum. I'm a partner at Eight Roads Ventures India. We are a global venture capital backed by Fidelity. We've been doing this for a long time, actually over 50 years. We currently manage about $8 billion across healthcare and tech. And we've actually active partnerships with about 300 companies globally. Beyond India, which is where I'm based, I'm in Mumbai. We have a boots on the ground presence in Europe, Japan, China, Hong Kong, and a pretty strong partnership with our sister fund in the US called F Prime Capital, which is also backed by Fidelity. And healthcare is front and center of what we do. We've got active partnerships with over 130 companies in the sector. We've done more than a couple of dozen IPOs in the sector, and we're actually very proud that about 20 innovative drugs have been the US FDA from our partner companies. So I think that's pretty rare in the venture. And I'll speak about our presence in India, that's the franchise that I'm a part of. We've got a 10-member team that owns in life sciences. We have 23 investments right now across pretty much the entire value chain in India, and we're quite proud to have created or at least partnered in the creation of several category leaders. So if I talk about we partnered with Lotus Labs, which is today the world's largest producer of generic ARV APIs. In the biologic space, we partnered with Plasmagen, top 3 provider of blood plasma product. In consumer health, we were early investors in the sector. We partnered with Cipla to create a company called Cipla Health, which is a market leader. And also more recently with a company called Viziva, which is the leader in clean nutrition in India. And a year or so ago, we also invested in novel therapeutics with a company called Immunil, which is India's first cellular immunotherapy company. And more recently, in medical devices, we've just partnered with a company called Tootsie, which is the leading provider of clear dental aligners in the country. And healthcare technology is something that's pretty close to our heart. And we were amongst the early investors in PharmEasy Ascent, which is today the #1 digital health company in India. And so, yeah, in terms of my background, I'm in my 3rd career. I started life as a management consultant, clients in pharma and consumer goods. Then moved to the corporate world, worked with Pfizer, where I used to lead their injectables business in India. And now at Eight Roads, I focus on care and life sciences. So it's been fun looking at the healthcare sector from a few different vantage points.
Thanks, Ashish. And sounds like your three roles have led you into the right place. You're doing the right thing now. So, Sanjana, I'm gonna head on over to you. Last but definitely not least, over to Sanjana.
Thanks, Jay. Hi, everyone. My name is Sanjana, and I'm an investor at Radical Ventures, which is one of North America's largest AI-focused funds. It's an AI-focused fund because the founders of our fund were operators who built, scaled, and sold multiple AI companies, and also launched one of the premier fundamental research institutes called the Vector Institute, based out of Toronto. We are a Toronto-based fund, but we invest in North America and have global ambitions to invest in many geographies, including India. In terms of where we invest in companies that are applying computer vision, natural language processing, machine learning to disrupt massive industries. Healthcare is a key focus area for us, with close to 50% of our portfolio in healthcare. We have companies ranging from 3D printing of human tissues to AI for drug discovery companies, and all the way down to like digital image exchange platforms on the more infrastructure side. The founders of our fund are also very involved in the regulatory side of AI and healthcare, and are working with governments to open up access to, healthcare data that lies with one party, and structure it in a way to enable machine learning on it, such that we can develop machine learning based solutions that can be exported to the world. Toronto is an interesting, or Canada is an interesting place because healthcare data is controlled by one source. And it is also one of the most ethnically diverse data set, with more than 50% of the population, say in a city like Toronto, born outside of the country. So we're very excited about what's happened with healthcare. We see, like Alka said, engage on a weekly basis with 10 to 12 companies, see thousands through different formats, pitch decks and pitch events, etc. And very excited to be here. My connection to Mumbai and India is that I've grown up in Mumbai. I started my career in investment banking and moved, and also worked at the Tata Group in their investment and incubation arm. And a lot of the early bets that we worked on in healthcare, edtech, are now seeing the light of day post the pandemic.
Thanks, Sanjana. And so one thing which we should be saying out to the policymakers out there, one thing you should add to your list of exports that India is very good at is exporting top VC talent to other countries. So it feels a lot like that we've got some great homegrown innovation, but also being able to see people who can go out and change the world in lots of other places as well, which is absolutely fantastic. And Sanjana, particularly thank you for joining. I know you've had a tough time to be here today, so thank you very much.
Also happening, Jay. I came back from the US, so I think we should celebrate that.
So there's a marketplace going on, is there? There's a marketplace of exchange. I like it. Thanks, Alka. Well, actually, Alka, I'm going to go to you first, actually, in terms of, because we've definitely got a large spectrum of funds that have been around for a very long time, funds that have been around for a relatively short time as well. And I wanted to get your sense of how did the pandemic really shift your thinking around, particularly thesis, how you go out and deal source, how you evaluate. It would be great just to hear your opinion on kind of what changed for you during the pandemic.
I mean, this question actually may be relevant for people who've stayed a longer time, because pretty much when I started, the pandemic started, right? So I didn't feel a change as much. But clearly, I mean, some of the things we were betting on that has to happen, which is around adoption of technology by clinicians, by patients, them just getting comfortable with it. It's no longer whether they will get comfortable. They have gotten comfortable. So I think it's playing to our advantage, if anything else. But talking about the VC process, I mean, just before this panel got together, we were just talking about how Zoom and video calls have impacted every sort of interaction, and it impacted the VC world as well. Not just virtual events, pitch decks, we're meeting founders. You know, earlier we would meet them 7, 8, 10 times in person. Now you don't need to do that so often, right? It saves energy on both sides. It's a hybrid model. So I think just in terms of information is easily flowing. And I must say, I've reduced the number of coffees, because the number of people that would come to your office and just social courtesy, you'd have a coffee or a tea. So that's definitely helped health-wise. But just the mode of interaction, you've gotten very comfortable doing things digitally. And that, at least for me, has created more capacity in a lot of interesting ways. Obviously, travel, commute time, which everyone talks about, but you can do much more focused meetings. Of course, it doesn't take away the whole in-person experience, which has to be there in some shape or form, but you just see much more happening. People are just more comfortable being approached digitally, people sending emails, you're just more comfortable taking calls. And I think that has changed the most, at least for us, in the deal evaluation phase.
Yeah, I mean, Lavanya, you and I were in the same city for the majority of the pandemic, and we were doing a couple of deals together. And so, you know, and actually, I don't think compared to before, much of the process changed, to be honest. But did things feel similar to you being on this side of the ocean?
I think, as Alka said, I think I completely resonate with everything, you know, that, yeah, it's just the medium that's changed, but the issues that we're engaging on and, you know, just the importance of healthcare, it's just exploded. And I think that's been very, very exciting. I do think that because we are linked to a healthcare provider. The one thing we saw it, while we saw all the excitement that went into digital health, it's also important to remember that this is a sector that took the hardest hit. And a lot of the issues that were brought to the forefront, this has been something that has been a long time coming, whether that's behavioral health, whether that's clinician burnout. So, for us, we've been in this, pre-pandemic, and, it was really good to see that a lot of the issues that, clinicians face, that healthcare providers face, are finally coming to the forefront and then being recognized by a large section of the society, and not just a niche that was, previously, the cheerleaders of digital health innovation. So I think, yeah, it's a very, very exciting time, but yeah, it's also important to remember a sobering thought that it's also come at a cost, because it's not too late, but yeah, it's great that it's finally arrived.
That's really helpful. And anyone feel free to jump in at any point from the panel. But Ashish, Sanjana, I think what I wanted to kind of get from you is what advice would you be giving to founders in today's day who are sat there thinking, well, I want to go out and raise a round. I maybe used to go to an event to meet investors, or I'd go and meet people for coffee. With that kind of starting to come back, but not fully there yet, what advice are you giving to founders in terms of being able to outreach to the right investors at the right time? For either of you to go first.
Yeah, so I think Javid, what we're seeing is, just sheer importance of healthcare as a sector has really come front and center. And so I guess, of course, business models have evolved, and we're all evaluating companies differently. And I guess the only point of difference I would have with Alka is I haven't cut down on the coffee yet, but other than that, very much resonate with everything else. I think what we're also seeing is, this is a sector that has come into vogue to a number of other investors as well. And so I think, if I was to talk to a founder today, I'd say that, the list of potential investors you should be speaking to is probably broader. I think most, sector agnostic funds, especially at the earlier stage today, have really recognized the importance of healthcare, right? And especially when you think about areas like consumer health, certain elements of the manufacturing value chain, etc. I think today we are seeing a number of funds, doubling down, getting really interested, talking to folks. And so I think it's a good time, I think, for founders to really, cast the net wide. I think to talk to people who can give them very diverse inputs. And so I think that is one. And I guess the second is, we're all living virtually today, and the composition of this panel gives you a sense of, the kind of interest that is there across geographies. And so I think not limiting yourself to, very traditional, physically accessible sources of capital is probably prudent. Everyone is a Zoom call away. I think, barriers to adoption have dramatically diminished, and we're seeing some very exciting companies in India going global and attracting global investor interest. So I'd say that, the pool of investors is probably much more wider and deeper. And so if you're building something disruptive, I think, there is a lot to reach out to.
Yeah. Agree, Ashish. And I think that the way I would think about it is that the upper funnel of our investing process has scaled massively, that we can do so many more calls and so many more conversations. And the remote world enables that. But the lower funnel, where you get into a diligence stage and the real meat of investing, which is the company building stage, the face-to-face interactions are very important, because it's a very long-term journey. In terms of linking that to advice to founders, like Ashish said, right, that you can access anybody today. Geographical barriers aren't a limit, even domestically. So I would say that for founders, it's important to create and demand and begin conversations with investors early on. And this is not for investors to get to know you over points of time, but it's also for founders to decide who they want to get into almost like a marriage with for 10 plus years. And that's very easy today with Zoom, because you can have 30-minute conversations with several people and then kind of keep filtering investors out. The flip side to that is that I would also say that founders should reach out to believers, and they should look into the fund. They should look into the investors and see how their thesis is aligned with the thesis of the fund. Because I shouldn't be saying this, but the attention spans of people are very low in today's world, and finding believers is extremely important for even creating demand and circularity for your process. And then that helps in and that links to articulating and emphasizing what makes your company and yourself differentiated to win in this particular market. And that links to the alignment with the thesis of the fund.
And just one more point, I'll add, is all of us are today, looking for, the next wave of disruption or companies that will reinvent, the way we do things through and post the pandemic. And that also means, I think, for entrepreneurs, you may have traditionally slotted investors into certain stages. I think even that and segmentation has probably changed, because many of us are looking at ideas that are being built, truly groundbreaking stuff that is being built for the first time. Many of these are companies that have kind of really hit their stride through the pandemic, and so you would find a number of investors who maybe a few years ago would have been characterized by larger check sizes, more mature companies who are willing to double down on innovation and go in earlier. And that's not just true of us, but I think many of our peer funds. And so I think, it's helpful to then think about, if you're an entrepreneur, who are the kinds of investors who can really add value to you? Because, a lot of the entrepreneurs are kind of in a brave new world now. And so it's not just capital, but I think value addition that's becoming more and more important. And that can come in geographically from many different sources, but also in terms of people who've been there and done that across different stages.
That's really helpful, Ashish. Thank you. Sorry, Lavanya, go ahead.
Sorry, and I think the point that Ashish makes is so true on, that value alignment with the investors. In the end, healthcare is a sector that impacts lives. And there is a reality that, you need to generate data and you need to kind of prove out ROI and clinical safety before you actually implement products. So, the speed at which you can implement might not be the same as other sectors, and it is for the right reasons, because there's actually a, human impact at the end of the line. So having investors who understand that this is a sector that can create potentially huge impact, but initially there could be, time that it takes to reach there is very important. And so that the right incentives are in place.
Yeah, and we internally think of that as what the main driver behind that kind of funding gap at the pre-Series A, Series A, even all the way up to Series B, is because there's this longer time towards data gathering that needs to be there for most startups in that space. I'll come back to a question on that to Sanjana in a second, because I know the deep tech angle that the fund takes is actually may give us some good insight there. But just a quick question from the crowd. With more and more health startups emerging, how has what you consider differentiated or not become, how what you consider differentiated or novel evolved over time is the question that comes out. So, I mean, Alka, what's your view on this? Have your thoughts on what's novel changed over time, over the period of time of the pandemic, or is it still quite similar?
I mean, at some level, you can segment the startups depending upon if it is a tech innovation, a business model innovation, a product innovation. And you really have to take a segmented look and not really a sort of peanut butter reply to this. And in that will determine what is the winning attribute. Sometimes it's as simple as, hey, it's the team that's, team always matters, but the team that's execution focused, that will do the trick. But sometimes it is the scientific capability of the team. Sometimes it's the regulatory capability. Sometimes it's, there's just so many factors in healthcare. So I think each segment is evaluated on its own merit to figure out. And one thing I want to say, which I alluded to, and I guess most people did, just because there is another startup that is similar to yours is not a good thing or bad thing. It's okay. And often when I see, fundraising saying we have no competition, that to me is a little bit of a worrying sign. So you'd asked at some point, what advice would you have for founders? Acknowledge the competition And sometimes the differentiation is the team structure, the incentives. It could be at that level as opposed to, hey, just a product. So yes, competition is increasing. There will be, even, you mentioned Ashish Farmeezy, but there are multiple other models out there, and each successful in their own right, right? So just because there are more startups doesn't mean that, they can't be differentiated and they can't coexist.
Yeah, we see the exact same problem, Alka, I think we see the exact same problem. Founders come to us, say, we are the most novel thing in the world, and no one is doing what we're doing. But in reality, someone might be doing something very similar. Someone might be even doing the same thing as you, but you've just chosen not to show it, and it actually ends up being a weakness rather than a strength. So I think it's a really great point to pick up on. But I'm going to ask one question that picks up from that, which has come up on the Q&A, which it was asked slightly differently, but I will paraphrase it. It's about the how do you protect your novel IP when you're kind of talking to investors? I know a lot of startups are very very sensitive when it comes to sharing their information with investors, and this question was asked very specifically with the scenario where investor takes some details from you and then invests in a competitor. In thesis driven funds particularly, I think that's always going to happen a little bit because you're investing in the space, so you're picking between who you think is going to be the winner in the space. I mean, Sanjana, I know you do a lot of scanning out there. We speak regularly on this every quarter. So how do you help people kind of get around that problem or make people feel comfortable with that problem?
Yeah. So, as investors, we see thousands of companies, and managing NDA obligations becomes a very cumbersome task at especially earlier stage funds. So all we have to depend on is our reputation. Ultimately, VC is a people's business. We have nothing but our reputations to differentiate or to survive. And so we take our confidentiality very seriously, and we work with our individual cases of companies in how much they're willing to share. And given that VC is a process where, like, you start with a few conversations, you go into diligence, you have an investment presentation, then you make a decision to term sheet. We talk to companies and tell them, share as much as you're comfortable with. And then in the case that there is just something that is it's absolutely necessary to protect, we will enter into an NDA.
I'd add something here as advice to founders. If it's a business model innovation, it will be copied, right? So, I mean, pure product tech IP, hard to copy because of the regulatory barriers and patents and things like that. But you just got to assume competition is going to be there, right? Whether, home collection of diagnostics was a novel idea somewhere in 2014. Today, every company is doing that, right? So I think this fear of stealing my idea, because again, you have to categorize your company. Is my company doing a product innovation, process innovation, business innovation, whatever form of innovation? There are some innovations you just can't protect to some extent. Now the fear of the investor will take this and shop it around to someone else and they'll pick the winners. Frankly, there's a little bit of a choice at your end as well, right? Of going to multiple investors as well. And the questions they ask may trigger thoughts for you as well to improve your product. So it's a two-way street a little bit. You're also at some point seeking ideas, and hopefully conversations are helping you build, position your product. So this fear of competition in this highly interconnected world, other than if it is a IP, design, we all know the Apple case study of being very, very secretive. Very few companies are that way. I haven't seen, just take the example of employee benefits. I mean, just the number of companies in India that have come up, it's small marginal differences. So you got to just quell the fear of competition to some extent.
And if I can just build on this question, Jaybir, if it's okay, I think, and Sanjana spoke about, due diligence. I'd say, the due diligence is also a two-way street, right? And so while the venture fund will due diligence the company, I also think it's helpful for entrepreneurs to also, do some homework and figure out which are the funds that are best fit for you. And all funds have their partner companies on their website. It's a very connected world. Reach out to entrepreneurs. Get a sense of, not just, I think, specific point issues like this, but more broadly, what's the value the investor is adding to the company? How are they to work with? What's the working style? Are they hands-on, hands-off? I think it's important to generally get as much flavor as you can, because it's not just about the capital. I think, good companies have access to a lot of capital, right? I think it's also more the value that you can get from that capital. And so I'd say IP is probably an issue, and one, you can easily check. But I'd say more broadly also, it's helpful for entrepreneurs to do this homework as they talk to funds, because you then get a better sense of who is a good fit for you.
Yeah, and Ashish, it rings true so heavily, this idea of doing your homework before you go into an investor. I mean, a lot of people say, I want to target this company, I want to target this investor. And you say, well, do you know they've got an investment in your area, specifically in your domain today, in a competitor? And have you worked out whether that will be an issue, whether it won't be an issue? Do you know what the risks are around that? No, we see it all the time as well. And I think it's a very interesting point. I think one other thing just to kind of throw into the mix is also around relationship building with the investor. This idea, we spoke about it earlier, there's a marriage of sorts happening when there's an investor-investee relationship. And if you can't build that trust with each other at the early stages of the relationship, you're not going to be able to build that trust when the investment's actually been made. And so if you walk into the relationship in that way, where you're feeling untrustworthy or feeling that other people might not be trustworthy, you'll be in a situation where this will translate into the relationship forever. So I wanted to just get a sense with you, all on the call, how much of your personal relationship with the founder comes into the decision-making process of whether you invest or not?
I can take a pass at that. I think, personal relationship, I think, there can be good and bad sides of that, right? I think a personal relationship means that you only invest in silos and people who are part of your echo chambers, which I think is not fair. It doesn't give everyone an equal chance, and it doesn't allow you to explore talent outside of your comfort zone. However, a personal relationship can also be built on things around authenticity, credibility, clinical research, data security. How are you thinking about regulatory compliance? So I like to define my personal relationship with founders based on these facts, and you can get a sense of how authentic they are, and are they thinking about the end-to-end pipeline of how you implement products in the healthcare space. So yeah, that's how I define personal relationships, and I don't try to get into the personal bias side of things.
I mean, I'll take that one step forward. You made the marriage analogy, right? In India, we all familiar with love marriages, arranged marriages, marriages through an introduction. All kinds of marriages are possible, and all kinds of marriages can lead to success, how much ever due diligence you do or not, right? So there's a little bit of, yes, we need to do diligence on both the founders and investors, but we all should be a little realistic. Like all marriages, everything doesn't go perfect. So to expect perfection from a founder or an investor, I think is living in a utopian world. There will be good things, bad things. Every investor has horror stories, same with every founder. So I think really understanding, I just don't want to give the audience a sense of, hey, you do your diligence. Yes, you have to do your diligence, but even then, like a marriage, there will be good periods in a marriage, bad periods. They may still lead to a divorce. They will still not be happy, and those are case dependent, right? So one bad story or 3 good stories may not be the outcome. Of course, just like we do diligence, the expectation is we've checked on A, B, and C, and D. So you're going prepared, but also be prepared with a very realistic mindset of things. In a marriage, you have discussions, you have arguments, you might not get along for a period of time, you might get along, it's very natural. So I just don't want people to get that expectation of, if you find the perfect investor or the founder, the ride is always smooth.
No, it's a very good point, Alka. Sanjana.
Yeah, no, I would add to that. Actually, a separate point is that what I define as a relationship, or like information that is exchanged over a period of time. There's this interesting point of view that invest in lines, not dots. That is, have conversations with founders, when they're just starting out, 6 months later, 12 months later, so that you can see evolution versus just getting carried away by the point in time. And so that for me is personally is important when I have to come to a decision myself as to whether I want to make an investment in a company, is if I've been in touch with the founder for a while and I know what has been happening. And the founder can also then learn more about me and the fund.
I would have a counterpoint with the competitive environment that we're seeing. We get deals, the negotiation dynamic is such, sometimes you have to make a decision in 4 or 5 or 6 weeks. Ideal world, absolutely. I would love to spend 12, 18 months. I mean, I've invested in companies where I've known the founder for 8, 10 weeks, at least in the fund we have. But yes, to the line can be shorter. It is a line, so it's not one discussion. And some cases it's taken a year. Some cases you rejected it at the first time, but a year and a half later, as the thesis evolved, you change. So I just, these dynamics play out based on, a market is made up of what are your options at this point? Is that a thesis you're proactively going for as well? So there are all kinds of models. I'm sure each of us have been put in situations where there's a process that's running, right? And you have 6 or 7 weeks, you may decide not to participate in it. And Ashish, I'd love your view that sometimes in process, if you can decide not to, but a lot of deals are being intermediated in India, right? And there's a process, right? So you have to make up some decisions.
Oh, no, absolutely. I think we certainly don't have the luxury of not participating. It is of course a competitive world, and I think how we are solving for that, Alka, is because we are sectorally focused, what we try to do is a lot of teamwork. Yeah. And so most of our investments, or I would say a reasonable chunk of our investments, are in areas where the team has done a lot of background work. Yes. Understanding is the sector we like, what are we looking for, what will make us say no, what will make us say yes. And so then when we proactively go out and try to meet companies in that space to get a better sense of it. And so when we see something we like, and you're so right, I think timelines have shrunk and processes are very competitive many times. What it means is a lot of the background work has at some level been done, and then we focus on specifics of the company, of the team, of the entrepreneur, and there's usually enough time there. I think we good that despite timelines being crunched, I don't think the quality of our diligence has shrunk. I think just we've had to do a lot of heavy lifting beforehand before we get into the meat of it.
Sorry, I was on mute. I think I agree with you, Ashish, as well. And one of the things when you look at the inside-out view of people investing from India outside is you've got to add some really heavy process to the timeline when you talk about things like SEBI approval and all that kind of stuff going through. So we all know and deal with regulation on a daily basis, I'm sure, and that adds to the complexity, and founders aren't always in the knowledge of what's happening behind the scenes. So that idea of thinking like the VC, you need to know what the VC is going to be doing on the other side in order to be able to have that respectful back and forth of this two-way street due diligence process. It's fairly similar conversation, but there are 3 questions that have come to me kind of simultaneously. One is described as a candid question. So I'd love to hear a candid answer as well. What is the share of logic versus gut feeling in the investment decision? And they go on to talk about how much does kind of having an approach that is put through of someone that you already know or someone that is introducing the startup, how much does that make a bearing on your decision-making process? And then the kind of connected question was when someone is saying when they went to, as Vikas is saying, when he went to earlier stage VCs, they said they didn't have a thesis in the segment. So how do you work with that? Those funds that you just ignore, or can you build a thesis and bring it to the funder in order to try and convince them into your area? So two questions there. The first one more on the kind of how much do warm leads matter type question, and the other one much more towards the what do you do when the investor says you're at thesis?
So
and I'm happy to throw it
I'm
to
just
anybody.
maybe going to start in terms of like the North American environment in the last 9 months has been crazy. Like I have seen investors give out term sheets, and we've also been put in situations like time crunch situations, but we do take a relationship and a little bit of a longer term thesis driven, plus the founders or people in that team for a little bit longer. But I've seen people give out term sheets. It's like, oh, team TAM tech term sheet. Like that is how quickly. And I really don't know how this is going to end well. And these are top investors that I speak to on like a quarterly basis in the West Coast and where we are. So there, if you ask me how much is gut, how much is logic, I think there is a lot of gut, but early stage investing, especially seed or pre-seed to series A, pre-seed to seed has a lot of gut. Series A, you do look for, product market fit and signs of commercialization, but there is an element of that. So I just wanted to address that transparently because that was the candid question.
No, we see it a lot. We don't just see it in VCs, right? As angels, I angel invest fairly often. You see a startup, you like the startup, you say, well, no, I've got a gut feeling about this startup. So there's much more of an emotional response than there is a logical response. Even though I'm a professional investor and I invest for a living, there is often the emotional response, which is hard to override. So fantastic. So Lavanya, I think you wanted to.
No, I think this is something that I think a lot about, on the gut feeling. I think you can't have a gut feeling on an area that you don't know anything about, because then it's not really a gut feeling, right? Because what are you basing it off of? So, just adding on to Ashish's point, if you understand a certain area and you've gone deep into it, then what you take is a known risk. You know that there are some unknowns out there, and, you understand the space and potentially what you're taking a risk on. So I think I believe in, the gut aspect only in areas which you understand deeply, and especially in healthcare. If you don't, you've not done your research on what patient anonymization is about, or what GDPR compliance is, or what are the regulatory challenges that exist in the ecosystem, then what exactly are you having a gut feeling about? Because these are basic hygiene factors. So yeah, this is something that's just my perspective.
I'll probably add on that for a bit. I think it's a little bit of the more mature age of the company, and the larger the amounts involved, you stop taking gut. I mean, if I have to write a small angel check, and when I mean small, depends on my own comfort relative to what I can afford, I may take a gut, especially when it relates to people, because people can't be logical beyond point. You see something in that individual which you say has that X factor, right? And it's hard to put down. But there is a theme, there is a thesis, at least for sector-focused funds like us. And then as the stakes grow, the extent of homework, the extent of diligence, we look at private equity firms, quite often they will do 1 or 2 deals a year with the same amount of resources. If you look at early stage, sector agnostic, sometimes they're doing 15, 20, 40, 50. I mean, you can also measure by that, right? So there's always a balance. When it comes to people, I do believe there is a gut, but whether it's a warm lead or LinkedIn lead or an email page, that to me matters less. I have met people at startup events which we've gone and funded, didn't know them. I've met people who are friends of friends, so you take their time. But I don't think that has affected my decision, the source of entry.
Ashish, I'm going to give you 1 minute I know you did want to comment as well, because I do want to get into closing remarks.
No, so I think just to build on what what I think the panelists pretty much said. When you think about this, stage matters, and the more the capital, the later the stage. I completely agree with what Alka said. I think logic, numbers, metrics, all of those become disproportionately important. I also agree that I think the warm versus cold aspect honestly isn't necessarily something to worry about too much. There are enough get introduced to investors who would be a good fit. If I look at our own portfolio, say in India alone, and I won't name specific companies, but one of our really high performing companies was one which was a cold outreach by one of the early members of our team. And he just really liked the company. He said, you got to talk to them. They weren't even actively raising, but we just, we loved what we saw. The entrepreneur liked us, and, it's really worked out well. And so I think, access to investors is not terribly hard. And B, if you have a warm lead, fantastic, please use it. But if you don't, I think there is still enough interest out there that good companies and good entrepreneurs will get funded.
No, that's really helpful. Thanks, Ashish. I think for the final part, just to come back to the session, the title of the session was about scale. And I wanted to do a little bit of like kind of portfolio love for everybody here. So I'd really like to know from each of you if you've got any examples in your portfolio where someone has done something to go to scale that's really impressed you, that you think was a very good strategy. There's some stories on kind of where people are really using their whole selves to be able to take their startups to scale. If there are any particular examples that anyone wants to bring to the fore, that would be really helpful before we close out the session. I'm not going to put anyone on the spot. I'm going to let you come forward yourselves.
I mean, something that comes to mind, and one of the trends, and I'll come to the example in a minute, one of the trends I'm beginning to see is early founders being open to consolidation, mergers, acquisitions, strategic partnerships to get scale. And I've seen that most recently with our company Meadow that acquired Doxpa, just to get scale in the area they were and to gain speed. I think that was one example. It wasn't that commonplace in early stage companies to do that, and we are seeing much more of that.
And maybe I can chip in here. We've made, in the past 8 months, we've made about 5 investments in the sector in India. All of them have an element of technology. I think what's interesting is, the focus on the global market opportunity. And I think that's really come to the fore through the pandemic. And look, this always existed in India on the manufacturing side, right? On the active ingredients, generic pharma, I think we were front and center targeting the global opportunity. But we're seeing that now on technology. And, we are seeing young companies building their product to global standards for global markets, whether it's HIPAA compliance, GDPR, data security standards. I think the second thing is, for the large part of the last 1.5 years, most of the companies are buying and selling virtually, and it doesn't matter if you're co-located in the same country or thousands of miles away. And so remote selling and virtual sales cycles have really taken off. And I think we are seeing technology companies target that, and there are at least a few companies, and I'll throw in a plug here or there, but for example, which is focused on the US market, or a company called Proximy that we partnered with, which is targeting multiple continents, the US, Europe, China, as well as the Indian opportunity, and we invested as a coalition, across these geographies. I think all of them have realized that, if you build a product to global standards, this is probably an environment where you can really take advantage of everyone being remote and accelerating that adoption significantly ahead of, what would have been the normal approach.
And I think just, adding to the, what Ashish said, I think, one of the portfolio companies that we've seen really kind of use this time and scale effectively is our portfolio company in the US called Luma Health. They are a patient communication platform, which is now on the journey to become a digital front door. And if, there's 2 things that I'd like to highlight that they've done very well. One is actually go from becoming a point solution to a sort of end-to-end solution. And in healthcare, end-to-end means one is on the patient side, but the other is on the integration side as well. How many healthcare technology systems are you integrating into? How deep are your EHR integrations? How deeply are you integrating into PAC systems if you're into imaging? So I think that both visible and on the other side in the actual healthcare IT is very important. And the second one is, just rising to the occasion, to the need of the hour. So, Luma Health opened up its platform for COVID vaccine appointments and, was able to book up to 2 million appointments on its platform. So just being very open to both your customers' needs, the patient's needs, and innovating quickly. I think those 2 are 2 strategies I'd like to highlight.
Sanjana, final word to you.
So I'll close out. I mean, little bit linked to like Lavanya's point, at least the second point, we have a company in our portfolio called Pocket Health, which is an enterprise digital image exchange platform, but it is patient-centric, which is also very unique in the North American market, given that a lot of healthcare is B2B and consumer requires you to go like the payer or the benefits route. So what they've done is that they, for scaling, they created these viral loops in local economies where they tied up with a lot of enterprise like hospital systems, and that became a patient acquisition channel. And then patients, were trying to share their images between different providers, and that's how Pocket Health acquired more providers onto their platform. So there was this beautiful loop that kept playing out, which started out in Ontario, where they captured 80% of imaging volume, and then spread across Canada and the US. And like Lavanya said, the second point with respect to her company, they also rose up to the occasion and saw what they could do to, take advantage of the opportunity in front of them with COVID and enable patients to, have a, say, vaccination record and transfer their imaging records between hospitals virtually at a time where they couldn't actually go physically into hospitals in areas like Canada, which were totally locked down.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Sanjana. I'll take the chair's right as the final word. I wanted to just thank all of our speakers. It's easy to chair panels like this when you have amazing speakers. I don't have to do much. You do my job for me. And the final word from my side is also to thank Thai, Mumbai, the organizing committee and everybody, because there is a commitment to showing diversity both on panels and in your own portfolios as well. Diversity geographically helps us all, but diversity of gender, diversity of ethnicity, diversity of location, we've shown through this panel and some of the other panels which are there, is something which Thai, the organizing committee, IMA, everybody who's gone fed into this event is very important to them, and very important to me as well as being part of this panel. So thank you for that. If anybody has any questions, please do drop us off any questions further. We're happy to answer some of them. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm sure you can find everyone else on LinkedIn, as you can do these days. Feel free to connect with me at least. I'm sure everyone else will be happy to as well. And everyone else have a great rest of your sessions. Hand over to you, Shweta.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Jay.